Okay, good evening, everyone. I will call to order the May 6th, 2021 Ways and Means Committee meeting. Roll call, please.
Chairwoman Sims.
Here.
Alderman Gould.
Here.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Here.
Alderwoman Tice.
Here.
Great, thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is approval or amendment of the agenda. Are there any amendments to be made to the agenda? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Any objection to approving the agenda by acclamation? All right, seeing none, it'll be so approved. Item number 3, we have no announcements, appointments, proclamations, or recognitions. Item number 4, report of committee chair and alderman. I do not have a report other than continued gratitude for all of the additional meetings we've been setting, and everyone has come ready to attend. So thank you again. Alderman Gould?
No report.
Alderwoman O'Neill?
No report.
Alderwoman Parker Tice?
No report.
Okay, item 5 on the agenda is the city administrator report. Bola?
Yes, Alderwoman Sims. In discussions with Mayor Dimmitt and actually Chief Speece as well, we've been including information in the city administrator weekly report regarding the Wayfair and used sales tax update. There has been many bills over the years introduced in Jeff City by the General Assembly regarding a bill that would allow all municipalities to be able to collect this internet tax without the presence of a physical store by retailers within the state. There have been, I think this year alone, maybe a total of 4 bills that were introduced. So we just want to make certain that the board is aware that even though we have a use tax right now in Brentwood that we're collecting, and conservative estimate in terms of the revenue that it would generate, 285. This new source of revenue for us is not guaranteed, because the bills that are being introduced or that have been introduced in both the Senate and bill are not really favorable to municipalities. There's one that would require that if it's passed through the General Assembly, we have to go back to our residents and ask them to approve it again. So it costs the city, I believe, about $40,000 to hire Unicom Arc to help us undertake an education campaign to educate our residents alone, that resulted in a 52.1, 52.2 voter approval rate. So, which is one of the considerations why the board hasn't directed staff or even taken a vote on how we would spend this new revenue coming in. So we just wanted you to be aware that even though we're collecting it now, depending on the outcome of this bill, it might not be guaranteed going into the future. So we just wanted to continue to share these updates with you. And as there's more activity in Jeff City, we'll continue to post that in the weekly city administrator report for you all to read and stay abreast on what's going on.
Well, I'm confused. So if we have our use tax now, and if this bill that's been included with our packet is passed, does that mean that the state's overridden our municipal ability to pass a tax like this one?
Right, we'd have to take it back to the voters, asking them to reapprove it. I guess a good example is the Medicaid expansion. Voters approve it and they don't fund it in the General Assembly. So that's what we know. Yeah, you're right.
Alderman Gould?
Even with those complications, am I correct in my judgment of we expected the revenue to be a little higher than 28 or 285? Or
we're hearing that other municipalities, they all start off with a conservative estimate. Then when it actually comes in, it's significantly higher than that. We've only have maybe 3-4 months of that revenue, so it's too early for us to tell whether it's just going to come in at what we budget or whether it's going to be higher. So we're working with Cook and Riley to monitor that every month.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Tice.
Well, my first comment is we only have a few more days for the General Assembly, so maybe.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
they'll, absolutely.
And then what happens if it passes? What happens to the revenue that we've already collected? And does it go into effect in August when the governor signs it? Like, could we keep collecting until August, or do we stop collecting? I mean, presumably it's not law until the governor signs it. So
Exactly. Yeah, it's not law. So I don't know. It really depends on the language and whatever bill is signed by the governor.
thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Bola, did you have any other reports?
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, item 6, department reports, that is blank. Move on to item 7, which is old business. 7A is the EAP dental vision life ADD short-term, long-term disability premiums for 2021 and 22. Who is
Jason.
guiding us through that? Hi, Jason. Take it away,
Hello.
please.
Well, most of the following memos are mine, so hopefully the first couple will be easy to get through. This one basically just covers all of our additional premium type items with regards to rate increases or potential rate increases for 2021, 2022. Most of our plans have a plan year starting July 1st and then going through June 30 of the following year. Of the indicated items, the only one that we're going to see a rate increase for the upcoming year is the dental plan, or excuse me, the vision plan. And I should point out that the vision plan has not seen a rate increase in 7 years. So coming in at a 3% rate increase is minimal after 7 years. Just like we do with the medical benefit, the supplemental coverage for anything above and beyond the employee only, that cost is passed along to the employee or has been in the past. You can see what those new rates are going to be. Basically, what it means for the city, since the city covers the employee only portion, is that it's going to be going from $4.96 per month up to $5.11, which is a minimal amount over the course of the year. I believe it's under $200 for the course of the year. And again, we do budget for a potential increase of up to 4% across the board for all of our benefits. So the fact that this came in under that after not having a rate increase is pretty good. The dental coverage, we had a 2-year contract signed last year. We're in the midst of that, so there's no rate increase to that. As far as the life, AD&D, short and long-term disability, those are all covered by Lincoln Financial Group. We did see a rate increase last calendar year. They did not put that into effect until February of this year. So even though we saw a rate increase, it was only a rate increase starting partial through the year. Because we saw that rate increase, there is no additional rate increase for the remainder of 21 to 22. So that was really all this is for. It was just more to let the board know. And again, I would like the opportunity to implement this so that I can pass this along to the employee populace, and the rates that the employees will pay is indicated at the very bottom of the memo that was out there. Again, it's a minimal increase, 3%, and it only affects the employees if they have coverage on anyone above themselves.
Are there any questions? Alderman Gould.
I'm assuming you need a motion from us in order to do that. So
Yeah, I'd just like to take it to the full board. So just a
Yep.
motion to take it to the full board. Yes, please.
I move to take the 3% increase in vision coverage to the full board for approval.
Second.
Okay, there was a motion made by Alderman Gould and a second by Alderwoman Tice. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Chairwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Great.
Passes.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, 7B, which is the revised life insurance and accidental death and dismemberment rates.
Right. That one's also me. As you recall from one of our past meetings, one of the things that had come out of Ms. Higby's benefit survey was that the city kind of lagged behind a little bit when it came to the life insurance that was offered and accidental death and dismemberment. The suggestion was to do a multiple of salary with a cap. The committee authorized me to go forth and speak to our vendor, which again is Lincoln Financial Group, to get a quote on such. My estimate came in pretty much on par. There would be no rate increase on a per employee per unit cost, but since there would be an added amount of coverage, then we would see a rate increase associated with that if the board chose to implement that. Like right now, we have a flat $50,000 for life insurance and for accidental death and dismemberment. What this would allow us to do would be double an employee's salary, and our lowest currently paid salary or full-time employees at about $36,000, $37,000 a year. So if you double that, then they would be getting approximately $70,000, $75,000 worth of life insurance. So every single employee would see a benefit to this. The cost, again, is relatively minimal. We're currently paying about $13,900 a year. The cost would then go up to $33,000, which again is about what my estimation was. Given that we have already received a rebate from Slate, and we typically do on an annual basis, the amount of the rebate that we have received from Slate that was unbudgeted would be more than enough to cover not only implementation of this, but for the remainder of calendar year 21, but potentially into the future as well. So what I am asking for is permission for this to go to the full board for a vote for a potential implementation as of July 1st. Again, the cost to the city, we're currently spending just under $14,000 a year. The new revised rate with that increase in coverage would take us to about $33,800, so just under $20,000 increase across the board.
Does anyone have any questions for Jason?
And again, that is annualized, so the cost for the remainder of 21 would be half of that amount, if that makes sense.
Okay. Alderwoman Tice.
I'm sort of fundamentally for this, but I have a question for Jason. Is this something that like people are clamoring about? I mean, if you average it out per employees, it's like $180 an employee. What's the cost to implement the additional cost to implement this? You know, I think it would be a great benefit, but what's the cost with the expense?
Well, the downside is the only way an employee gets the benefit is if they pass. And obviously we don't want that to happen. And fortunately, during my tenure here, we've only paid out this benefit one time. We did have a gentleman pass away at the start of last year. And I know that benefit was greatly received by his family. It's one of those things that most employees don't necessarily think about. Especially some of our younger employee populace. You know, if you've got the under, say, 30 crowd, they're pretty much, think they're young and invulnerable. But I think this would be something that would be very, very well received by any employee. I would say probably 40 on up. Because again, for a significant portion of our employee populace, they would actually see an increase in their benefit from $50,000 all the way up to $150,000. Again, because it's a double what the salary is, any and all of our employee populace that currently makes above $75,000 or above would get the maximum benefit for this, which is pretty much the entire police department, the entire fire department, all of the department heads, a significant number of management staff, and even at the lower levels of our employee populace, this would be a benefit that, again, most of them don't necessarily think about, but would definitely be very well received. We have some people that have purchased supplemental insurance so that they can reach that dollar figure, and this may afford them the opportunity to drop that coverage. You know, usually when I recommend insurance to employees, it's enough to cover whatever their mortgage would be in the event of their passing. And at that $150,000 mark, that would help a lot of our employees out significantly. And it would be useful as a recruitment tool as well.
I guess if I could just finish, I think this is a great benefit, but I think we we as a committee and employees get so wrapped up in salary, and we have a lot of other really incredible benefits in this city. And so this is one that would be a great additional benefit. So I'd just like to point out the obvious.
Thank you.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
You make the point that this year the cost to the city could be covered by the surplus payout, $85,000. But of course, that's this year.
Yes,
So we would have to write that into the budget beginning a year from now.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Gould.
Slightly similar question in that were you suggesting that the full amount of the surplus be used to pay basically 2.5 years worth of the additional increase of annual payments, or I mean the renewal rate that we're talking about, or and if so, do you anticipate, or have you tracked? You said that we get the surplus every year. Pretty much, we can't guarantee it, right?
Correct.
But has it been consistently, around that 85, or is it sometimes 13?
In the relative short time frame that I've been here, it has exceeded about $50,000 each year.
Okay.
But again, it's not a guarantee. And as far as whether or not we could carry those funds forward, I don't want to speak for the finance department, because public accounting is far different than private accounting. We may be able to do that, but I don't want to give the impression that we can, because I don't know if funds can be allocated for something like that. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the finance department or give that impression.
So I sit on the Slate Board of Directors, and the health plan has been really, has done really well for the group, the 28 members or so. So we have, since inception, or maybe at least 2 or 3 years after we joined the health plan in Slate, we have been receiving these types of surplus, and the amounts vary every year, and it really just depends on the claims history. That really depends on how much we get. So that's why it changes every year. And so if the recommendation is a renewal for 2 years, that would be an agreement with whoever the provider is. This is really no different from a dental or a vision coverage where they set the rate, 2% for, the first 2 years, and then the third year is when you see a rate increase. We can easily budget for this. I don't see any problem with it whatsoever.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised for questions. So at this point, the chair would entertain a motion to move this item to the full board for a vote for implementation in July 2021.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Alderwoman Tice and a second by Alderwoman O'Neill. Is there any discussion? Alderman Gould?
I just had one more question and this was something that just as a reminder, I want to make sure, refresh my memory on it. This was part of Linda's recommendation, correct? Mrs. Higby's recommendation to move forward with this.
Correct.
So to be more parity with our comparators, correct?
Correct. This was one of the items that was relatively low cost to implement. The other one was to change our vacation policy, which I've already taken to the Ways and Means Committee. And based on what you say as far as the next item I have coming up, I'll bundle the two of those together at the upcoming board meeting so that we can implement those.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no further questions. Roll call, please.
Alderwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Motion carries by 4-0.
Great, thank you. Item C, wait, are we on B? Was that B?
That was
Are we
B.
moving on to C? Okay, sorry. Item C on the 7C on the agenda is the proposed amendment to the City of Brentwood Employee Handbook, Police Department Recruitment Policy. Jason, I bet, is this one you still?
Yes,
as well?
ma'am, it is. Yeah, I'm kind of running the game today. This policy was asked to be put in place by our police department, mainly because we have experienced some degree of difficulty in years past in our recruitment. And so one of the fundamental issues, and the reason I'm going into this is to kind of give a good background. Since I've been here, I've worked closely with both Majors McIntyre and Hawkins to go and do in-person recruiting at some of our local police academies. The problem is a lot of times when you get to these academies, a good number of the candidates are already snatched up by somebody. So what the hope of this policy would be, or what the potential for this policy would be to get them either right at the beginning and when they enter into the police academy, or while they're in process of being at the police academy, actually bring them on board as an employee at that point, much like we have done, or what we offered to do on the fire department side. The difference here would be that unlike the fire department employee, while we're waiting for one of those individuals to go through the academy, they're still potentially a viable employee in that we only hire paramedics. So we can bring in a fire recruit that does not have the St. Louis Fire Academy, and they can actually work on the ambulance until we're able to send them through the academy. The premise here would be we actually hire them while they are in the academy at a reduced rate, with a caveat that they're going to be staying with the city for a period of time. Now, most of the time when an employee is already, or an individual in this type of circumstance is already in the academy, they have already prepaid the academy costs. So unlike the fire department recruit, where we would typically pay for the academy and then get those funds recouped from the employee, that would probably not be a necessity for someone that's in the police academy. I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen, but I have provided for that as a potential, in that there would be a repayment policy if we were, the city were to pay for the tuition for the police academy recruit. In exchange for hiring this employee while they're in the academy, we would basically bring that individual on as though they were a police officer at step one, but 75% of step one. For every month and or partial month that they would be employed by the city and working at the fire or at the police academy, they would be responsible for paying $1,000 back to the city in the event that they left prior to 3 years. That would then be reduced as time went by. The longer they stay, the less they would ultimately owe to the city. So it's just a recruitment opportunity, a recruitment option. It's not even saying that we would necessarily need to utilize this. We just wanted to make an amendment to the employee handbook to put the potential for this type of a policy in place in the event that we look to bring a candidate on from the police academy. At that point, I can kind of turn it over to either Majors Hawkins or McIntyre if they wanted to chime in. But that's in essence what we're looking for. And again, the last 2 pages of the document that I have there would be their tuition repayment agreement and then the compensation repayment agreement in the event that the candidate came on board with the city. So Major Hawkins, Major McIntyre, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. It was actually a pretty succinct way of saying what we're going for there. And I will say too, this used to be a common practice in municipalities and even in larger departments where they would hire people while they were in the academy. And it was an incredibly effective recruitment tool. And then police work kind of went into an era where they couldn't beat people off with a stick. So many officers, potential officers, were putting in for jobs, and now the pendulum has once again swung the other way. And to your point, Jason, this would make Brentwood PD a front runner, at least a contender, I'll say that actually, to the recruitment game, which has become increasingly difficult for I don't know what reason, but just kidding, totally know why. But we would really appreciate the opportunity to have a program like this, and we think that it would afford Brentwood PD the opportunity to reach out and grab those recruits who would be best fits for our community. So thank you very much for talking to that.
Are there any questions? Alderman Gould?
I think this is a great idea. I think any anything we can do to improve recruitment at the younger officers, it's great. Are the academies fully supportive of this type of arrangement, I would assume?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. They have always been. Their involvement in the recruitment process is pretty hands-off. They basically say, we'll do our best and we'll train to an accreditation standard that we set for our academy, and you guys can come in and recruit as you see necessary. And again, to Jason's point, when he and I have been out recruiting places, we've been to entire classrooms full of recruits where every single recruit there already has a job.
Right.
And it makes it very difficult for us to seem marketable at that point. So, but the academies are more than accommodating for us to come in and do recruiting in person and try to get the best that we can. So it's a good program.
And Mr. Gould, if I may add to that end, Major Hawkins and I also appear at these police academies. Major Hawkins actually is an adjunct instructor for the academies, which also gives us a leg in to see which recruits, are standing out. I know she's participated in some oral board interviews. I'm slated to do one next month at St. Charles Police Academy, which helps us kind of almost eyeball some of these recruits. It's almost an interview without an interview.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to approve the recruitment policy change as set out in the memo and to move the issue onto the board for approval.
So moved.
Second.
All right, there was a motion by Alderman Gould and a second by Alderwoman Tice. Is there any discussion? I would only comment that this reminds me of all the big law firms that would target the young associates in law school and try and scoop up the best talent. So I think anything that can put our police department in that position to get the best talent, we should we should do. So not seeing any other questions, we'll take a roll call, please.
Alderwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill. Where'd she go? Oh,
Muted.
yes, okay. Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Yes.
Carries.
There you go.
Very good.
Okay, so that carries. Moving on to item 7D, the compensation plan implementation costs continued. Who's our spirit guide tonight on this topic?
I'll start off, and I will probably partway through turn over a portion of it to Ms. Higbee, as she's got some supplemental information to kind of go through this. So just to catch the committee and those watching back up, we've had several meetings with regards to a potential implementation of various compensation programs. The last meeting that we had on the 15th, I put forth a presentation that kind of broke down some of the key decisions or recommendations that the committee would need to make and move forward to the full board. Some of those were addressed in the last meeting. A couple were shelved. So the items that were shelved, one of those was internal parity between the police and the fire department with regards to supervisory staff. What was asked at the time was for Ms. Higbee and her associates to go back out to the market to basically confirm the organizational structure of all of our comparators, police departments and their fire departments, to see if there was an internal parity within those organizations, as well as then evaluate whether or not we should reevaluate the recommendation as it standed to whether there should be internal parity for our police supervisory staff to our fire supervisory staff. The other item that would need to be moved forward would be what the actual percentage philosophy would be. In the past, the city has maintained a 75th percentile philosophy, basically meaning that for out of every 4 of our comparators, the city of Brentwood would basically be the number 2 of those. And the committee was looking at whether or not that was still a valid philosophy, or whether or not we needed to potentially change that to the 85th percentile, or I think Ms. Higby actually even looked for leading in the 95th percentile. Again, I provided some breakdown of what the potential implementation costs of that would be. And then the other items that would need to be looked at was whether or not we would implement as we have done in the past, which would be at the next appropriate step, or whether or not the intent was to ensure that every employee was bumped 2.5% or greater, provided that was a possibility within the pay structure. And then lastly, whether or not this implementation would take place effective 1/1 of 21, 7/1 of 21, or potentially at some future date. If the decision were to do this at a future date, obviously the numbers that have been calculated would need to be looked at yet again. And they are dependent upon our staffing levels at the time. The modeling that I put forward that you have access to does not count for any vacant positions and some of the positions that are not currently on the pay scale, like our city administrator position. So at this point, what I would like to do would be turn it over to Ms. Higby so that she can address some of what she had found with regards to the market and how they looked at the potential parity or lack thereof between police supervisory staff and fire supervisory staff. So unless anybody had any questions for me before I do that, then I would like to let Ms. Higby kind of take the floor.
I'm seeing no questions, so
okay.
Ms. Higby, you can proceed.
Okay. All right. If we can let Darren take over the screen. I've actually prepared some information so that I'm kind of a visual person, so it's always easier for me if I'm looking at something at the same time. What we were asked to do, and I think this is sort of a really important recap if you look at it, is when you look at the where we left things, what we were asked to do was to look at an internal equity request to see if there was any basis in the market. The request was that the police corporal be equal to a fire lieutenant and a police sergeant equal to a fire captain. To do that, we obviously went back to all of your comparators and asked for the full fire department and police department structures. We asked for both job descriptions as well as pay structures, because again, we matched what you sent out in the survey, but somebody could have had a job, and we found that in some cases that was not a match to what you had sent out. So we looked at job descriptions, obviously. Then we looked at the levels of supervision in comparator cities with both titles. Remember, we didn't have a lot of folks who have that corporal role, but we looked at that. Then we looked at overall levels of supervision by the size of the city, and then we looked at what was equal in comparator organizations. So rather than focusing on title, what we were focusing on is that first level of supervisor or the second level of supervisor. So again, just a reminder, this is kind of where Brentwood looks like today. You've got a chief, you've got a major, sergeant, corporal, and then you've got your police officers, what we call the boots on the ground. You've got a chief, an assistant chief, a captain, a lieutenant, and one of those is a medical officer, and then firefighter, paramedics, EMTs kind of thing. So again, what we tried to look at was sort of the structure, if you will. So then we just kind of summarized it. You got 13 people that are in some form or fashion in a supervisory role in the police department, total of 28 people in that department, and you've got 8 in fire with 23. So that's kind of where we started. So what does Brentwood look like today? So I'm going to go through the data with you. I'm going to roll through it pretty quickly. If you want me to slow down, just throw an arm in the air or something so that I'll slow down for you. Corporal versus sergeant, again, it doesn't matter what you call them, and that's why we started looking at first level supervisor versus second. When we looked at the descriptions for corporals and sergeants, one of the things that we saw is a consistent supervision, where in some locations it's really sort of a fill-in when a sergeant is absent for whatever reason. Others, may have a position of corporal, for example, and they supervise all the time. So they are not sort of filling in behind a sergeant. The one consistent thing for a sergeant is that they are the ones who are responsible for evaluation. So sometimes the corporal, when they exist, are involved in scheduling and some level of supervision, but they don't do any evaluation. So then when we looked at a lieutenant versus a captain, in some locations, the lieutenant is just a designation for a medical officer. They don't really supervise anybody except for that medical component of the job. And then descriptions typically are second level supervision, and they can have sergeants as a direct report if we're looking at police departments. The captain descriptions for police most frequently reflect a 1 down from the chief level. Again, titling is so varied from department to department that I felt like for any type of real analysis, we really have to look at level of supervision. Is it 1 down from that? Is it 1 up from the boots on the ground kind of thing? So that's where we ended sort of the job description review. Didn't challenge anybody on where they had matched jobs before. As a reminder, we only had 3 cities with corporal classifications. Those 3 cities do not have any fire positions for comparison. So I couldn't do a apples to apples, if you will, simply because they don't exist in those cities. We did find that there were other cities who have a, if the person so it's sort of a corporal kind of role where they actually pay a stipend if somebody fills in, but it's not something that is paid all the time, and there isn't a separate classification for that role. All 3 have an additional level of supervision between police officer and chief. So you're going to see that in the data here in a minute. So again, if I'm going too fast, sing out, do something, and I'll slow down. When we looked at the levels of supervision.
Can I just note something? It's more of a, I really can't see anyone when this is up. So if you do have a question, you know, please feel free to step in. If I've got to regulate that more later, we'll cross that bridge. But I honestly can't really see anyone. So I don't want anyone raising their hands and then thinking I'm not acknowledging them. But just wanted to put that out there. But other than that, please go on.
Okay. Okay, in the police, the majority of comparators have 5 levels within the police department, starting with police officer and ending with chief. So we got 5 total levels. And 11 of the comparators have 3 levels of supervision between a police officer and a chief. And as you know, only 3 have a corporal. When we get to fire, except for Clayton, all comparators have 5 levels from firefighter to chief. So again, same level kind of thing. One of the levels, according to the job description, is the medical officer. And it's not over anybody in any other capacity. So they aren't in a supervisory level with respect to being on the scene of a fire, for example. And supervisory levels are consistent at 3, excluding the medical officer when that's all that position does. So that's sort of the high level piece of what we found. So next up, when I just ignored titles and said supervision levels 1 and 2, how do they line up? For fire, supervision levels 1 and 2 are higher in 6 out of 8 comparators. So again, fire consistently is coming in with that first level of supervision above police. One comparator, their whole set of police is just higher than fire, and that's Clayton. Across the board, their police guys are higher than fire guys. One comparator is equal, first level only, and 2 comparators have a medical level that's equal to the second level of police supervision. So it's there. But again, regardless of how you title them, and cities do seem to title things differently, depending on what the preference is, you really have to come down and say, where's my base level of supervision and what's the 1 level up, which is what we were trying to look at. So just to give you kind of a visual of what that looks like, when we look at that, again, I know this slide is really busy and I apologize, but the kinds of things we wanted to look at was the population size of the city, the number of employees, then what does that hierarchy look like, regardless of how they title them, and then those levels of supervision, and then the between the top and the bottom, how many are in between, if you will. And you'll see Brentwood is over on the far right of this slide. So when you look at this, because some of these didn't have fire departments, I thought, you know, maybe we should need to be looking at this, because again, part of my role is to try to support what the city is looking to do. And so when your chief came in with this, is to say, okay, what could I find that would sort of support that position? So what I did is I tried to look at it next in terms of the population size of the city and said, okay, who's close to Brentwood in terms of the population size? So that's where I went next with this, to see if I could sort of suss out if there's something going on there that we could kind of lean into, if you will. So when we look at that for the population size, obviously some folks drop out. You have at least one of those that doesn't have a fire department. So again, we couldn't really compare across the board. So again, I looked at it in terms of the population size and said, I'm still looking at 5 and 3, with the exception of Ellisville, who's got an extra level in there. They have a corporal, but they don't have a fire department. So I don't have anything back to compare it against again. So that's how it kind of looks like on population. And again, I tried to stick as close as I could to your population size. But then I went back and said, okay, let's look at employee size, because sometimes that's a better indicator of things. Sometimes it's a better predictor of pay, for example, if you're looking at an HR person. So when I looked at the employee size, again, you picked up some of those same ones, but we also then were able to pick up Creve Coeur, for example. Again, doesn't have fire, so we're missing it there. But once again, couldn't come up with a leveling issue or support, if you will, for saying that those were equivalent when we looked at them. So that's kind of that piece of it. So then I went back and said, okay, what's going on with respect to pay? And when we looked at the first level for police and the first level with fire, you see that Kirkwood is higher on fire. Clayton, as I told you earlier, higher on police across the board. DePere was equal on that first level of supervision. Frontenac, fire comes out higher. Ladue, pretty close in terms of what they've got, just a smidge different. And then Maplewood's higher for fire. Richmond Heights higher for fire. And then of course Webster is as well. So, and right now you sit in parallel with what's going on in that marketplace. So when I looked at it and I said, okay, so what's kind of the percentage difference? Because sometimes it's not a lot. Like Ladue is 0.3%. You could make an argument, I think that's pretty equivalent. So then we went over and looked at the second level supervision. Who's the second group up and where are we? And once again, you're kind of seeing the same thing, that depending on who you're looking at, there can be some pretty significant differences. But Clayton is the only one that comes out with police higher than fire on these on a consistent basis. So that's kind of where that first and second level supervision came in. We then went back and looked city by city. So I won't bore you with the next 10 slides that take each city by itself. Let me just show you one and you can see exactly what we did. Darren, let's look at one that didn't have fire. So you didn't have fire positions, nothing to assign it to. And then if you look at Clayton, which I think is our first one that has, there we go. We went and just looked at the pay ranges right across to see what could we do, what was different, where were we. So again, we looked at these in detail to see if we could find some support for these are equivalent positions. And again, what was critical is, and I think the chief's position was, when people match these positions, were they matching on title? And so again, it was really critical to me that we look at this as first level of supervision and second level of supervision, and just not care what somebody called somebody. So again, we did these for each one of your comparators. So anyone in particular you want to look at, we can, but that's kind of what we put together for you. So in summary, from a market standpoint, we really don't have any market justification for making these equivalent positions. You heard us do that same thing on EMTs versus paramedic. Again, your call from an internal equity standpoint. And from our perspective, it's not what you call them, it's the content of the job. And the basic content here that we're looking at is first level supervision and second level supervision from the boots on the ground kind of thing. So I will pause and see what questions you have on this. And then I know the chief put through a proposal and I've looked at that as well and have some commentary there if we want to go there.
If anyone's got any questions, I can't see you, so feel free to ask. Well, apparently there aren't any.
I have given you so much information, you just don't know what to do with it, right?
I will say that's my situation here. I'm trying to like absorb all this.
Okay, look it on. Jason, do you want me to go into the second piece of this in terms of the proposal from the chief, or shall we? No? Yes?
No, I think we're good right now.
I'm getting a head shake. Okay.
Kept trying to hit unmute and it would not work out for me, and I almost threw something across the room, but everything's fine. Yeah, I think the chief's proposal is, and if I can't see it in front of me, unfortunately, but I believe it was the 5% increase. I think that from our perspective on the police side, we were pretty much, you know, knowing what we do about the rank structure and the varying rank structures in the area, and how everyone is so different, both police and fire, dependent on so many factors. It was pretty much a given that, you know, yeah, that there wouldn't be a lot of market data to support anything one way or the other. And I believe the chief's proposal is an increase for our supervisors of 5%, kind of across the board, just to make it fair for the first and second line supervisors compared to our fire department. And Ms. Higbee, to your point for that internal equity piece, it would still not put them at the level of where the firefighters are in terms of pay. They would not be as high, but it would more accurately compensate them for their job roles, which are very similar to the first and second line supervisory job roles of our fire department. And I think another piece to that is then you look down the line and you say, okay, well then doesn't that make our corporals really high and our sergeants really high? And I think the follow-up to that is, you know, making the change in those titles and then putting our sergeants to lieutenants and putting our corporals to sergeants, so that in future studies they are in fact comparable, and it provides a little bit more stability for what we have going forward. And I think ultimately, I don't know that Chief Spees is called in, and I think he would like to say something, and if you can see him or hear him.
I can. He hasn't raised his hand, but
He did indicate that he had some information.
okay. Well, he can speak. He needs to unmute himself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Just to reiterate what Major Hawkins said, when we looked at this, and I did the same comparative study that you just heard from Ms. Higbee when you started looking at police and fire. I actually got all of the salary comps from the police departments from SLAPCA, which is the area police chiefs, in the last week, and we've been looking at them closely. The problem is, as you heard Linda say, is comparing apples to apples on what the actual performance is of those ranks. And I appreciate the fact that she's looking at the first level and second level supervision. I think the most important piece of this is going back 3 weeks when we had the discussion about internal equity with the fire department in Brentwood. I think that's the first question. The recommendation that Angie just told you that I sent to the city administrator and recommended to Ms. Higbee to look at was the elevation of our supervisors to sergeant lieutenant with a 5% across the board increase. That still puts them under our fire department supervision. As an example, the fire captains are making a little over $100,000. That would put our lieutenants, if they were raised to the rank of lieutenant, a little over $98,000. So the rank of corporal up to sergeant would be about $1,000 or $1,500 under what the rank of the fire department's lieutenant rank makes in Brentwood. That's an internal equity question to me. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what internal equity means within a city or a business. As it sets up on the comparative rate with other police departments, that's a very difficult thing to come to. And when you look at Linda's information that she's gotten in the last week or two, it's not very clear at all in terms of compensation off of these ranks. So that was my recommendation. I just wanted to make that clear that if we went to sergeant and lieutenant, they would still be under our fire department supervisors, but closer, and it would close that gap of the equity issue within the city of Brentwood. Thanks.
Are there any questions? Alderman Gould, and you are muted.
Yes, I got it. Thank you. When we talked about this the last time, I'd asked the question of the chief, what's the biggest need for the department? And you know, we only have a budgeted amount of money that can be spent. And I'm all supportive of finding equity and figuring all of that out, right? We also have the responsibility of making sure we can fund it. I asked the question whether or not the supervisory role was most important. If we had some money to spend, you know, is it the supervisory role or some of the other roles in the department, officer level? And you had mentioned the supervisory role, which was kind of took me a little bit by surprise. And I get your rationale for it, but yet we also have on the business here to request to add another position to the officer level. So I kind of ask, I guess the question again, the money that we have to spend, or we can try to find to spend, where is it most beneficial to the department?
So the hierarchy, in our opinion, and we've talked about this at length, obviously internally in the department, but the hierarchy of priorities is the supervision of our officers. So that would be the number one priority. The second priority in terms of compensation would be officers, and there will be 3 of them here shortly that are stuck in these pay grades for years, so that we don't lose our senior and most experienced and quality leadership out of our department. That third piece on the hiring of a police officer, it comes in third. So you end up with a budgeted position for 2021. In other words, when BOLA put the budget together with us, there was a request to have that paid for 2021. Of course, the issue is that's a position that doesn't just affect 2021, it carries over. The reason, I guess the shortest answer to your question is the reason we asked for the 29th officer at this point was we are uncovered in many ways in our retail area and complaints for traffic from our citizens, which is what that 29th officer would be used to do.
I don't want to interrupt, but I know we're going to take that up next. So I kind of wanted to just keep it focused, if that's okay.
Yeah, so those are the priorities. The supervision piece is really an issue for us, and keeping them engaged and doing a great job for us is important. This would be just another way to reward them doing a good job. And we talked 2 weeks ago about how vital that role is to the city and to our department about the decisions that these folks make on sometimes 2 and 3 times a shift during the times that they're working. So.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest question that all of us are weighing is you know, we'd love to give increases to as many as is appropriate. I think the market does determine ranges, and that's the challenge that we have now. But I think the consideration is that it doesn't just impact this year, it compounds year over year. So we just need to make sure that there's sustained budget so that we're not getting ourselves into a trouble down the road, you know. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Woman Tice.
So I have 2 questions. So this 5% thing is brand new to me as we've heard it now. So has Linda done anything about this, or what's this cost? And along with that, what happens the next time we go to do a salary survey? Are then these positions are we just sort of out there with these positions and they're out of range and we have no comparators, or what happens? Say we approve this, then what happens in the future? I guess that's maybe for Linda.
Okay, the only thing I can address here is that we did see the proposal that everybody gets 5% kind of thing. And that anybody who's at the top of a range, I think, gets 5% starting with year 7 through year 20. One of the things that I did is we actually look every other year at your survey information, and the one moving the fastest is actually the patrol officer. So we went and actually looked at that role. It's not moving, the maximums are not moving anywhere near 5%. It's closer to about half of that. So I think that's sort of the key piece here for you is 5% is a nice raise, obviously in a year where things are running 2.5 to 3. But you can also see when you look at this 2016 to 2018, it was 4.4 over a 2-year period. So coming in at about 2.2%. And the 5.8%, again, it's under 3% per year in terms of the way the maximums are moving. So your question of, will you continue to outpace the market if you're giving 5% and the market's moving at less than 3? Yes, you will. But we were not asked to look at the cost of this particular piece. But again, because I saw that, I wanted to get a feel for how much is that market moving. And again, as we've looked year over year, the supervisory positions simply aren't moving as rapidly as that boots on the ground role. And so we really wanted to continue to look at what those maximums were moving year over year. And so that's why I pulled together the information this way. And the 5.8% that you see overall from the 2 years, 2018 to 2020, look at 3 of those folks had significant jumps during those years. Webster, we've been expecting for years because they just lagged behind everybody. They moved up 10.4. You also had DePere moving up at that same level. And then Ellisville, just out of the blue, had a huge, huge jump over that same 2-year period. But even that, when you look at them all together, again, you're looking at under 3% a year. So again, you certainly would be at the top of the market. And one of the things that we discussed several meetings ago is that changing your philosophy is the most appropriate way of addressing this kind of issue. And you have to be willing to lead the market in order to get raises for those folks on a consistent basis. Again, that's sort of a personal call. I always say when you're looking at your philosophy, you're looking at what the market will bear. You guys live in a glass house, so you want to make sure that whatever decision you make, you'd be comfortable with it being splashed on a billboard in the middle of Brentwood.
And I guess, has Jason, do we know the cost implications of this? This is sort of hard to
Sure.
wrap my head around because it's different than all these grids we've seen.
Just doing a real quick 5% for those basically 10 positions, because there's 6 sergeants and 4 corporals. You would be looking at an added cost of approximately $36,000 a year just for those 10 positions.
Jason, could I ask, when you also looked at that, did you look then at the bump above that level? Because that's the other piece we want to look at. Anytime we adjust for internal equity, you've also got to look at the levels above that to see if indeed that creates an internal equity issue, and therefore you're going to have to bump the pay of the people who sit above those officers as well. So one level you've already taken care of, but you also will have to look one more level up.
Well, the next level up for the police department would be our majors, and they're on a separate pay grid altogether. So with regards to that, give me one. And again, it would depend on what philosophy the board chose to implement for those particular positions. But currently, those 2 positions, the 2 major positions, are again on our our non-uniform pay grid, and they fall the same as our department heads, which is grid 26, or will be 26 based on the proposal. So I don't really foresee there being significant compression there. However, with overtime, there would be.
Thanks. Yeah, the overtime, I think, is going to start bumping those positions. Right.
And one of the things that had been on the website up until recently was the salary spreadsheet, the master spreadsheet that I put out there, and that indicated what every employee in the city's base rate of pay was, and then what they ended up at the end of the calendar year, which was to include overtime. And all 4 of the corporals for the last several years have received an additional $10,000 to $12,000 per year for overtime. Again, I don't want that to be dismissed, because it does represent additional time worked. But again, that does affect the bottom line. Once we start increasing base rate of pay rather, then every time they incur overtime, then you're incurring at a higher rate of pay above and beyond that.
Okay, I'm utterly confused. So, and I have zero ego about that. What can we just sort of walk me through this slowly? There are what levels in the police department? Obviously, there's chief. What comes after that?
The bottom line is we start at patrol officer. The
Okay.
next position up would be a corporal, and there
Okay.
are four corporals currently.
Well, let's just start with just give me the ladder.
Okay. All right. So you've got patrol officer,
Okay.
corporal, sergeant, major, and then ultimately the chief.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's police.
Yeah.
And
Linda's
what
got it
do
right
we
there.
have? Oh, hold on, let me drive this car for a second. What do
Thank
we
you,
have for
Karen.
fire? Oh, it's all right. So we've got,
Right there. There you go.
all right, I did not see that slide in this. Okay. And so what exactly is is the internal equity meant to, well, let's call our titles in the police department what we call our titles in the fire department and
No.
pay them accordingly? Is that what is being proposed to normalize the pay differential?
Well, in essence, currently our captains, on the fire department side, they cap out at $100,218 per calendar year. The sergeants, in comparison, cap out at approximately $92,000 a year. The lieutenants on the fire side cap out at about $90,100 a year, whereas the corporals cap out at $84,000 and change per year. So what the chief is, the concern that the chief had expressed, and I don't mean to put words in his mouth with, but basically that there is a significant differentiation internally between what our captains make and what our sergeants make, and then at the next level down between what our lieutenants make and what our corporals make. What Linda, in essence, did was go out to the market to see if there was parity within our comparators for those types of positions, and the market did not bear that out. Now, if the board were to choose or the committee were to choose to do that.
So let me stop you there.
Okay.
So if the thought process was, hey, let's call the sergeant a captain and pay them accordingly, is my understanding it that a sergeant's really not comparable to a fire captain? That's not an apples to apples comparison. Was that the conclusion of the Higbee report?
Linda,
I'm using that as an example. I'm just trying to get this through my skull.
Sorry, what our study really showed is, again, we came back, call them whatever you want to call them. You've got the first level supervision and the second. What the study showed is that across the board for your comparators, with the exception of Clayton, they don't view these as equivalent positions. With the exception of Clayton and the first level in the pair, I think it was, these are not viewed, fire's paid higher than police. I'm not making any commentary on whether that's fair or just or whatever. I can only tell you what the data says. Again, you're looking at the same number of levels of supervision, with a rare exception like town and country or something like that. You really are looking at, there's 5 levels within a department, and there's 3 levels of supervision from the top to, between the bottom and the top. So the levels are comparable. And I think you can, again, call them anything you want. You have a couple of them here where they actually, the second level down from the chief is actually called a captain. In one case, like Maplewood, it's a lieutenant. So again, it's not the titling, it's the level within the department. The fact that we don't have any market data that supports equivalency, with the exception of the ones we've talked about, doesn't mean that you guys might not view them as equivalent. It's just that, again, I went looking for support for what the chief wanted to do, and I couldn't find that in the marketplace.
Would it make sense in the police department to bring back a lieutenant as part of the ladder?
If I could jump in there, I would say yes, in my opinion, from the PD side, operationally speaking, especially. And I think you look at these two, and to Ms. Higby's point, you look at the first and second line of supervisors, putting titles aside because they can get mind-boggling and confusing. You put those side by side with the fire department, and the job roles are extremely, extremely similar. And for what our supervisors do, especially at the first and second level, they would definitely fit more into a sergeant and lieutenant category than a corporal and sergeant category currently. And again, an additional benefit to that would be then down the road, we would be more comparable to these other cities because we would have eliminated the word corporal. Now we can look at the first and second as sergeant and lieutenants, as many of our comparators do. And I think that would make this a little less confusing in the future. But ultimately, yes, Alderwoman Sims, a lieutenant and sergeant would be very appropriate for our department.
Yeah, I would encourage you to look at the total number of levels, whether you're including the chief and the boots on the ground at 5. That's the most common. That's kind of currently where you sit today. Titling aside, and I think this was the point of looking at those job descriptions, our instruction always when we go out is make sure you look at the content. And you had some comparators who have a corporal designation for somebody who fills in behind a sergeant. They didn't match to that role. It's sort of like you can tell how well they looked at the job descriptions when you see that the one down from the chief in Maplewood, for example, they matched your major against their lieutenant because it's a one down from the chief. And so I think your comparators, I would say, did a really good job of looking at the content of a job and saying, do I or don't I have something that matches to that? That aside, creating an additional level, which is what I think I just heard. Again, Ellisville has a 6th level. If you look at Maryland Heights, I think they actually have 2 more levels. Now, I happen to know that organization, and some of those are sort of grandfathered for retirement purposes. But Town and Country, and whoops, my screen disappeared. But those 2 actually do have a 6th level. So, and that's really what I think I hear being proposed right now.
Linda, this is Joe Speaks. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
We're not proposing another level being inserted into the police department. What we're recommending is the rank of corporal be eliminated because nobody hardly uses it anymore, and turn our corporals to sergeants, our sergeants to lieutenants for several reasons. One of them is the compensation study that you're doing is an easier study, and all of the muddy waters that we're hearing about the difficulty that you're having doing it points that out, that we become more consistent with other police departments without the rank of corporal. That's not making another rank. That's simply switching from corporal, sergeant to sergeant and lieutenant. The recommendation, Ms. Sims, the recommendation that we made was because of all this confusion was that we simplify it to try and put our sergeants and lieutenants, if that's the decision that you make to elevate them to those ranks, closer to our fire department to solve that internal equity issue. That was the recommendation that I made of a 5% increase for those positions across the board. And it still is considerably short of what our fire department makes in those ranks. Like Major Hawkins pointed out, when you look at the frontline supervisors, and that's what the lieutenant and captain in our fire department are, they are part of that boots on the ground supervision of people that are going out doing the work each day, just like our sergeants and lieutenants would be in the police side. That is a comparative job when you start looking at it from an internal equity issue. And they're considerably higher, as you heard Jason Coates tell you a minute ago, they're considerably higher at this point. And that's really the crux of this issue. Again, it's not about titling, although I think it would be appropriate to switch them to sergeant and lieutenant. Really, it's about job responsibility, and that's really what we were asking consideration for. And to eliminate a lot of this confusion, we were asking for a 5% increase across the board for it.
Yeah, Chief, I absolutely agree in terms of your titling change. I have no issue with that at all. What we saw is that when you consider this as the first level supervision and then the second level supervision, we did not see the parity between police and fire. with that one exception we talked about. And then, of course, you have a total outlier where Clayton views it exactly the opposite as of everybody else within the comparator group. So I think we're in agreement that, you know, you've got an outdated title and changing the titling. What I'm suggesting is that it is a first level supervisor and a second level supervisor. We're seeing that both in police and in fire. We're just not seeing the pay equity across all of your comparators. So in answer to your question of, will this look better the next time you do a survey, I would have a big question mark, because again, you've got a first level supervisor in fire who consistently across your comparators, with one exception, is consistently paid, has a higher cap, if you will, a higher maximum on those roles.
And I understand that, Linda. I guess the question becomes for the board members is, how do they feel about paying the police, not even on an equal level with the fire department, but at least closer? And I guess that's really what it boils down to. We can talk all night about comparative studies and the job titles, responsibilities. This is to me, it comes down to their philosophy, which you've been talking about now for a month, and that's whether or not
it's the internal equity.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that's
absolutely
really
an internal equity question. We can show you how other cities view those roles, but ultimately you're absolutely right. It is the city's decision on what they view as equivalent.
Would we have better comparators for, like, I'm using your, if we eliminated the corporal and brought back the lieutenant and I don't know, bumped everyone accordingly, does that mean that we have more comparators with our comparator cities? I mean, Jason?
Yeah, can I just, I think everyone on the call is getting a little more hung up on the titling and the position. So I don't believe that the city administrator or myself or anyone here would have an issue with the titling being changed. Where the difference comes in is what Linda is basically indicating, is that regardless of what the titling is for these various positions, the market is not bearing out an internal equity. Now, if we choose to do that, we can definitely do that. If the board wants to put forth Chief Speece's proposal of the additional 5%, they can do that. It would, however, be in conflict with what we've done in the past by, in essence, requiring that everyone be on a specific grid, because now we would be throwing that out for those two positions and putting them on a grid. I'm not saying we should or should not do that. That's above my pay grid. That's a determination for you guys to make. But the getting hung up on whether they're, I mean, let's just say for argument's sake, tomorrow they're sergeants and lieutenants. I don't think anybody would have an issue changing that, but that doesn't change the effect of what the study has done.
How does the 5% compare with, you know, our percent? I mean, I still like to speak in the language of our percentiles. I think I've said repeatedly on record that I'm for 95%. So, I mean, but where does that, how does that mesh?
Give me a moment and I can tell you. At the 95th percentile, there would still be no change based on what the market indicated for the corporal salary. That would still stay capped at the 84,846, which is where it is at. However, for the police sergeants or lieutenants, if you called them that, they would see a rate increase of approximately $6,000. The big disparity between the market and what we're doing internally is that corporal position. That corporal position, even at the 95th percentile, does not change. And that's based on Linda's data. So Linda, feel free to chime in and say that. But on the most recent spreadsheet that I put together, I actually included the 95th percentile across the board, not only for the uniform personnel, but for the non-uniform personnel, just for argument's sakes, in the event that the board wished to see that.
So if, I mean, I'm running scenarios in my head. If we were at the 95th percentile and we eliminated a corporal and we added a lieutenant, does that?
Again, the changing of those titles doesn't matter. The sergeants get closer at that point to what the chief is asking for, that 5%. At the 95th percentile, the sergeants are relatively close. But again, at that point, the captains are going to go up slightly as well. So you're still going to have, you know, as one moves up, the other one moves up, but the police sergeant / lieutenant is going to catch up a little bit closer to what that captain is. The difference is on the corporal side, based on what the market played out, there would be no change to that. But again, the board or the committee could choose to say, we're not going to look at the market data. We're going to add 5% internally to the corporals. They could choose to do that. The biggest issue that we would have if we did that then is we would be the outlier or the one that would be thrown out for standard deviation when we went out to the market in future surveys. And Linda, if I said anything out of turn, correct me, please.
No, I think the only thing that I would say differently is because you're looking at a first level supervisor, we might get a few more matches because we would reframe the piece where if somebody wasn't looking at a job description, they at least would be looking at a first level supervisor, second level supervisor. I think my concern is when we reframed it that way, pulled all that additional data in, we didn't see that equivalency that you're looking for. So I think you would have more matches, if you will, especially if somebody didn't really look closely at a job description, but you're still not going to see the equivalency that you're asking for. So I'm really sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this really is a internal equity city-based decision. The dilemma is, how are you justifying a 5% when the market's moving at significantly less than that? It's moving at about 3 a year at the high end, and that's with three people moving very rapidly over the last 2-year period of time. So again, if you were saying, hey, could we like hit the top of remember we looked at this, we hit the top of the market, you're going to lead the market. And then even for those individuals, they get raises for a very short period of time, and then they're right back at the top. So I think once again, you solve a short-term problem. The correct way to do it is to modify your philosophy if that's really what you feel. But once you make this move, if it's an internal equity move, then once again, you're saying, would we even bother to look at the market in future years for police? Or do we just look at it for fire? Because that's kind of what you're saying are equivalent.
And really quickly too, if I may offer a very, very, very simplified version of what the PD is basically asking for. We're basically asking the board members here to consider bringing Brentwood Police first and second line supervisors closer to Brentwood Fire first and second line supervisors in terms of pay through the 5% suggestion that Chief Spees offered. That is the ask from us. And to Ms. Higby's point, of course, and to Jason's point, that is completely up to you guys whether you think that is fair, considering everything that you've heard here today.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
So the other thing that sorry.
Excuse me, I want to go back to something that was said several meetings back, perhaps, where the people who are non-supervisory can earn overtime, but supervisory cannot. Is that a correct statement?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Not for these roles.
Yeah.
The only ones that can't, you're looking at on the screen right now. To put it into easiest, there you go. All of the other folks, all the ones that we're referring to on the fire side as well, can and do earn overtime.
And the salaries that we are looking at are base salaries that does not take into account any overtime. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, you're correct. So anytime you increase that, when they're working overtime, they're getting time and a half.
So something that could be, just throw out a figure, an 80,000 salary could end up as 83 or 84, depending on overtime.
To put it into perspective, for the last few years, our corporals have been capped out at 84,846. Last year, several of them earned at the end of the year about $94,000 to $96,000 a year with overtime. And again, they worked to earn that. I don't
Yes.
want anybody to think anything to the contrary. They put in the time to get that additional dollars.
Right, I understand that. Thank you.
Alderwoman Tice.
Could anyone comment on the philosophy that was implemented in Clayton, that the police is so much higher than the fire? Bola, do you know the history of that?
I do not.
It clearly seems like a philosophical statement. I mean, have they always been like that, Linda, or do you remember that from past years?
No, they haven't always been that way. But you had a couple of factors going on in the city, and that has switched over time. But again, will it switch back? Maybe, depending on, you know, kind of who's at the helm and what's going on. But the police has not always been ahead of fire in Clayton.
Alderman Gould.
Yeah, I feel like this, we keep kind of talking back around in some circles on this, and in my mind, it starts to get a bit of a slippery slope, because we're trying to make compensation discussions and decisions based on emotion and fairness and you know, type of parameters, which is a slippery slope, I think, and very challenging for the entire employee, you know, the employees of the city. I mean, I've worked and managed a lot of people, and many of them felt that they weren't fairly being paid, but the market dictates what their role is, and you know, there's really not a whole lot that can be done other than the market catching up, or a person moving up into a totally new role, which then pushes them into a different bracket. So I have a philosophical issue with when we are seeing evidence of comparator cities not really, you know, they have a similar structure and similar pay differences that Brentwood has. So it's not like Brentwood's an anomaly. I feel like, you know, if we start to make concessions on things, then we open the door for anyone in our city to start to question whether they're getting paid fairly based on who they think a comparative department would be. And then we can't really have a rational discussion about it because we're sort of making concessions here. So I guess I'm just expressing my concern.
Well, I would comment that I don't agree that it's an emotional approach. I have a philosophical belief about how police and fire in particular should be paid. If we focused on police, you know, the environment that they work in, the way policing has changed, our recruitment issues, Prop P, our use tax. I don't for the life of me understand why we want A-level streets and lighting all over the city, but you know, when it comes to your recruiting for police and fire, we're okay at the C level 75%. So I think that I think we're laying track for years to come in terms of, you know, what our public safety employees, how we're going to get them, how they're going to retain them. I think we want the best that we can get. I think we owe that to our citizens because that's how we are with our parks and with our streets and with our lighting. I think it's appropriate to be consistent when it comes to how we set the bar for these, you know, for these positions. I'm genuinely concerned looking at the climate of how what we ask of with these people to do, and how things have changed in the most recent years in terms of public safety. So I mean, I'm a believer that our philosophy should be that we pay them in the 95th percentile. And I'm hammering it again. I find the fact that Prop P passed is a mandate from our citizens to take a close look at that.
If I may, I agree with you wholeheartedly that the department needs to be, you know, we need to pay our police department and fire department, our public safety departments need to be compensated appropriately to what the market bears. I think that I absolutely think we should be as competitive as possible. And when we talk about recruiting, I think that is the biggest challenge and threat that I see to the city is recruiting and covering the gaps that Chief Speech spoke about. As it relates to Prop P and use tax, I don't know that we can guarantee a whole lot of that because we're going to have to be comfortable. If we decide to say, okay, let's fund it with, say, Prop P or use tax, if use tax goes away and Prop P runs out of money, like some articles have suggested by 2023, what do you do then, right? We kick the can down the road a little bit, and we've got to now come up with ways to continue to fund these positions. And so we should use, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, our Prop P funds, haven't they already been sort of spoken for? Bola, excuse me.
Well, just real quick, Alderman Gould, this is a philosophy. I mean, you know, if we're thinking of making changes, funding it's an entire, I mean, if we don't have money, we don't have money. I mean,
I think, and for a philosophy discussion, I'd like to keep it on the philosophy discussion because I feel like we're getting kind of twisted into some other areas. And so, you know, if we look back at the philosophy discussion, I think what's on the table is, do we agree with staying with 75th or going to an 85th? You know, we never voted on seeing 95th. So I'm a little surprised that we saw 95th in there. I know you really want it, but I'm surprised that was in there. That's not something the board voted on. And so, you know, I think we just, let's have that discussion. I think the other discussion is whether or not we want to have a different percentage for our public safety and, you know, non-uniform. And we've talked about the complications of what that might have. So I think we just need to be reasoned with this and take it one chunk at a time.
so what do you all want to do now? Alderwoman Tice.
So it's hard for me to, I mean, I know we have to vote on these things in silos, but I might have a different opinion upon this based upon this fire department issue. I mean, the police department issue based upon what the overall philosophy is. I don't know if others on the committee share my thought on that, but you know, this whole thing could be a lot of money for us to find. And if we're going to do something broad across the whole city and think about changing the philosophy from 75 to 85, then that's one thing. Or if the board, if we decide, okay, let's keep it at 75, but then philosophically this group decides that it's really important to be paying the police supervisors more, then maybe we do that. And if we keep the 75th percentile, I'm not sure if I got that across, but I sort of, they see them as pretty intertwined.
Maybe we come at it, I'm gonna go for some low hanging fruit. Because I think I think we've had, you know, a cogent, respectful debate about this, and it's a hard subject, and that's gonna happen on the big board level. Do you think there's any other information, a stone we haven't overturned? Because I know that frequently, I mean, as I can look at the participants, I know that the other members of the board have been looking at this material, have been tuning in, so that this information will be available to them. Do you, in your minds, do you think that we've at least gathered the pertinent data? And maybe if the answer to that question is yes, it may be that we don't have a clear recommendation, but we're ready to pass it on to the board so we can be informed by their opinions. But we can at least rest assured that we went and got all the info that that we needed in order to set this up for the best debate that we could have. Alderwoman O'Neill.
I think you're right in that we have had all the data that we could possibly want. I think we owe a great thank you to Ms. Higbee and people who worked with her to get us all of that data over and over again in some cases. I think it's difficult for me to say we should go from 75 to 85 or whatever. I truly think this needs to be a board decision. I think when it comes to a philosophy of something that was set in place years ago, for the four of us to determine what the city policy should be, I'd like to pass the buck on that one. I have feelings of what might be fair philosophically, but if it doesn't jibe with the materials in front of it, then I'm at a loss to say where I would go personally as far as recommending something to the full board. So I don't know where that leaves me.
So, Alderman Gould.
You know, I'm for at least taking. I think we have to narrow the scope a little bit if we're going to take to the full board, because we'll be continuing to do this for months and months here. So, I mean, I would be for, you know, taking the 75th and the 85th percentile. I mean, we've already talked about non-uniform and uniform with standard deviation. So I think, didn't we vote on that already, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I guess, you know, if we can move this along, I'll try to make somewhat of a motion. I move that we take the 75th and the 85th percentile with standard deviation, and next appropriate step with the implementation of 1/1/21 to the board for discussion and approval.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I'm following you in terms of, so standard deviation I got, and then the next appropriate step, is that, did I hear?
The first line on each one of those 85th percentile, and then you know, part of that motion is to just narrow it in and do the 1/1/21 as an implementation date, mostly because it's not the employee's fault at all that we've had any, you know, had difficulty or discussions for this long. And I think that if we philosophically change something and we decide to implement something, it should be retro to the year that they're in, you know.
Alderman Sims, can I ask for clarification? Are you asking that the motion change the 75th to the 85th?
No, I'm suggesting to take both of those parameters to the board for discussion and a decision at the board level.
All right, that's clear. Thank you.
I mean, I'll move it along, but I'm quite confident I'm going to be able to get a second at the board level to talk about 95. I mean, so I think we might as well just move them all along.
I don't think 95 was included in the motion. It was 75 and 85, wasn't it?
Right, but I'm saying that Alderman Gould is trying. I think it's. I don't think it matters how it's going to count. We're moving this on to the board. I don't think it matters how we do it in the particular motion, because it's going to be a long and complex philosophical debate, and somebody's going to make a motion to, consider some. I mean, that's what happened the last time we were, we were here, and it got 4 votes of the board. So I mean, I'm ready to move this along, but but just because 95% is not a part of the motion, that doesn't mean that won't be worked into the conversation at some point.
And make that motion at the board level. That the 95th was not approved to move along at this level, at this committee level. So I don't, in my mind, it's not for consideration unless somebody wants to make a motion that 95th, is considered. But to be honest, that I kind of ignored the 95th, even though the numbers are there and I can look at them, but that wasn't part of our committee's guidance. But it certainly can be made at the board level if you want to, and I'm sure you will. That's fine.
Is there any further discussion? All right, we'll take a vote.
Did the motion. Excuse me.
Yep.
Alderman Gould made the motion. Who seconded the motion?
I did.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Roll call.
Sure. Alderwoman Sims?
Yes.
Alderman Gould?
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill?
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice?
Yes.
Okay. Motion carries. By 4-0.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm going to be preparing some of the data, I just want to make sure that I prepare the appropriate information. I've got the 75th and I've got the 85th. There was no discussion in the motion with regards to the police and fire internal parity or the chief's potential of the 5%. Did you want me to at least work up that data so that it's available? And then if it comes up in discussion, I can show it. I don't want to come unprepared. And if it comes up at the board level, I'd like to at least have the data on hand so that we don't continue to push this further and further by needing another meeting.
That would be my direction.
Okay.
So I mean, that you come prepared.
Well,
Okay.
if I may, I would like to see that before the meeting, because it's really hard for me to process all that information that Ms. Higbee presented to us today and make an informed decision on it, other than philosophically. But like, I need to see numbers and see what that does. So that would be helpful to me.
I can literally update the spreadsheet that is on the screen, or that was included as part of the packet, and add an additional line under each one, the 75th, 85th, and theoretically the 95th, and show the 5% to those 2 positions. If that's in it, because what it shows right now is as it stands, with what the board has already decided, and then parity between the police and fire department. The 5% for those 2 particular positions would fall in between the pair of those. So it would be minimal effort on my part to do that, because I had hoped that when we would go through this process that the restructuring of the department would come into that. So I had kind of prepared for that. So I literally just have to plug a couple of numbers in, and I could get the 4 members of this committee that information by tomorrow without a problem. I mean, again, it's outside of this meeting, but at least you would have that information ahead of time. And I can present whatever you'd like me to at the board meeting.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
I think it'd be appropriate to send it to all of the board members as part of the package. If Bola could send it to everyone a bit earlier than the board meeting, as Alderwoman Tice requested, that would be a help. I'm not sure if tomorrow's necessary.
I'm just trying to be on the ball.
Okay, do we, I'm taking that as just general direction.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we need to address any of the I think of the parity issue, for lack of a better phrase. Is that something that we want to move on to the board? Or are there additional items that you want to cover on that topic? I'm looking for some feedback from Alderman O'Neill.
I think it's a board decision because, again, we're going back to philosophy. Do we stick with the marketing-based compensation plan we have, or do we vary it according to circumstance or whatever? And I don't think that's a four-person decision. I think it's for the board. So I would like to see that go on to the board.
So is there any, is it just we're going to move it on up to the board? Or are there... this is the first time we've kind of heard about it, so I'm not really even formed in my opinion, but I'm ready to have the discussion as a full complement of the board. Alderman Gould.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused. Isn't that what Jason was saying? He would prepare, just have a background and data on, so that if it comes up or when it comes up, we're informed. Does it need to be an additional?
No, I understood we were talking about numbers and the spreadsheets, but the structural idea that are we going to do something to achieve internal parity, and if so, what? That matter, being moved on to the board. I felt like there were two subject topics that we covered.
In structure, do you mean titling or just paying them the same?
No, however, whatever form that took, the topic of the retitling, or what does the internal parity look like? I felt that to be a separate topic than, hey, what's our percentage? So that's where I'm coming from. I mean,
so, the discussion on titling, I see that as very operational. It should be a decision of the city administrator. I think clearly that's getting into the weeds. If Chief Spees had provided us that information last fall, this would not have been wasting your time having this discussion. The department used to have lieutenants and sergeants, and it's very dependent on who the chief is. And that was a decision that was made through the budget process. You don't need to waste your time on that. We can easily model that in. I think your biggest discussion is that internal equity. Do you want to, so after we put them as lieutenants and sergeants, do you want to tag another 5% on top of that so that then there's no comparator?
If you think that we've got the internal equity issue covered by what we just did, good. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, changing titles, simplistic. I could handle that any day.
Okay, so there's nothing. So I think are we all in agreement, committee, that we've now moved on? We've moved the baby on up to the big board for further discussion. There's not another topic that we need to kind of drill through. Are we in agreement on that?
So we had made a recommendation at the last meeting, and Jason, I don't think this committee has reacted to, our recommendation to add EMTs and paramedics together. So
I thought that was what.
I
thought that was what the motion that Alderman, or I don't want to speak for you, Alderman Gould. I thought that was in your motion.
Was it?
EMT as PM.
Maybe I'm missing that.
Yeah, I thought we took that up at the last meeting. Didn't we?
Did. Yeah, we did, and that as well.
Did we?
Yes.
So they made a decision on that, Jason?
It was that and standard deviation that had been approved,
perfect.
and the other
Sorry
items
about
were
that.
moved forward.
And we're good to take this on to the board.
Okay, Alderwoman Tice.
So one of the things in the memo talked about finance and operations and where the money was going to come from. So I guess I don't want to prolong this meeting any longer, and I definitely think this needs to move to the board. But like, does the staff have to find this money? Do we have to find this money? But to say that we're going to use the one-time Recovery Act money to pay for this salary increase seems, I mean, that's not an ongoing revenue stream. So that seemed an odd suggestion in
Right.
memo.
That's what we could come up at the time. I think that clearly we need to do some more work to determine how we fund any of this. It seems that depending on what philosophy is determined, now if it's for the entire year, Prop P can't pay for that. There's maybe about $45,000 left in Prop P. But going forward in 2022, if the city no longer funds things like IT related requests from Prop P, and we just want to use the balance of that fund to fund all these salary increases for both police and fire, I think we can do that. How we fund this for the rest of the city, I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet.
And I just assume, you know, we have the philosophy debate and then put it with Cole's capable hands to find the money later, or cross that bridge later is more what I mean. As I see the two as separate. So okay, I think we're ready to move on at long last. All right, item 7E, request to hire the additional police officer position budgeted in fiscal year 21. Who's got that?
Major Hawkins, that came out of public safety. Do you want to take that?
Absolutely. To the chief's point earlier, kind of about the 29th officer, we did, I know the funding was kind of set aside to add an officer for the funding for the second half of the year, essentially, assuming we would hire another officer in this current process. And the value of that officer it comes across through the traffic enforcement piece that we've seen such a huge need for here, especially in the last several months. The requests from citizens, the traffic complaints from citizens have been really, and Alderman Gould, I'm sure you can speak to plenty of that too, as any of you guys as residents can. And what we were able to do with an officer who was dedicated just for a short period of time to traffic related enforcement was really incredible. From an enforcement standpiece and educational standpiece and a solutions-based standpiece, it was wonderful. Having an officer who we could task with traffic-related complaints and who could also address issues with our retail areas, which obviously drive a lot of the revenue for our city, is invaluable. We saw the value of a retail connection and relationships last June when we had the nationwide unrest, and the value there was, I can't even put it to words. We don't even really know what it could have been if the retail officer had not been able to make those connections, reach out and make sure that our businesses were boarded up and prepared for what was coming. And what came was a 1,500 person protest that very easily could have turned violent and destructive. But they didn't really have the opportunity, and we owed a lot of that to the relationship that was built through the retail officer. And if you guys remember, the retail officer was actually a position that was suggested through the CPSM study. They saw that as a real value to the agency, and we saw its value. We saw its value in dividends. It was incredible last summer specifically. Going forward, a lot of our crime is driven out of the retail area as well. So in summary, it would give us a tool by adding a 29th officer. It would give us a tool to address two of these really concerning issues, both with traffic safety and enforcement and retail management, retail communication, and plugging us into that piece that we quite frankly don't have the manpower for now to sustain those relationships and to continue both of those endeavors on a steady basis. And so basically that was the ask.
Are there any questions? Alderwoman O'Neill?
Muted.
You're muted.
Oh.
Now you're.
All right. Sorry, the phone is so different from anything else. You can hear me though, right?
Yep.
Okay. If Prop P funds are used, it has to be implemented July 1st. Can a person be chosen and begin work and paid from other funds before July 1st, if that is possible?
Well, I'll actually let Jason jump in here and speak to our hiring process, which I think would have a lot to do with that answer, if you don't mind, Jace.
Oh, sure. I'm not done talking tonight, I guess. No, our process technically closes tomorrow for the purposes of accepting applications. The process itself, once we get rolling after that, typically takes between 6 to 8 weeks to get a person physically on board. There is a written exam that is done. There is 2 boards that are done. They're an external board, an internal board, and then they meet with the chief. And then once an offer is made, then we have to do a very in-depth background check that's conducted typically by the Detective Bureau. And then we always send the individual to psychological testing through one of our vendors, and they would also need to get a drug and alcohol screen and physical. So that process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, and that's moving really quick. And it also takes into account the 2 weeks that an individual might have to give if they're currently employed. And as it stands right now, from what I recall of looking at the folks that have applied, none of them are like currently in the academy as we've had before. All of them are existing and law enforcement officials in other cities and or municipalities in the area or region.
Yeah, so the chance of us bringing on an officer and having that person, this 29th officer, on the payroll before July 1st is actually quite slim for all the reasons Jason just gave.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm having to unlock my iPad. Hold on. Alderman Gould.
So the funding for this is budgeted for, right? So it's not like we don't, we need to come up with the money somewhere, right?
All of it, 100%.
All right. Well, I'll put a motion out to approve to amend the ordinance of police staffing from 28 to 29. And am I on the right thing here? And to hire an additional officer, I guess, onto the board for approval.
Second that motion.
Second.
Okay, there was a motion by Alderman Gould and a second by Alderwoman Tice. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Okay, roll call, please.
Alderwoman Sims,
Yes.
Alderman Gould,
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yes.
Okay. Motion carries by 4-0.
Great. Okay. We are now moving on to the next section. Section 8, citizen comments. Is there anyone out in the gallery that wishes to address the committee? Are you seeing any hands?
No hands raised.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for all of your hard work, all of the research, all of the reading of the research, all of the thinking about of the reading of the research. We'll have a robust debate, which is, I think, what we owe the citizens, and it'll be fun, and we'll make a decision afterwards. So I really appreciate your hard work, and thank you everyone who came today to present. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, great. Thanks everybody.
Night.
We'll see you
Good night.
soon. Have a good night.
Thank you.